Garrett Rayne was a faithful husband, Braylon Cross, a charming gym trainer, Nolan Vexley, a traveling businessman, and Ezra Jorn, a respected church elder. But none of them knew that Odessa Rayne, the woman they trusted, loved, and lusted after, was carrying a deadly secret. By the time the truth came out, 3 were dead, 1 was ruined, and Odessa had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind a trail of betrayal, infection, and cold-blooded murder. Odessa Rayne was the kind of woman people trusted without question. With her honeyed voice and gentle eyes, she made even the coldest days in Larksville, Tennessee, feel warm. The women at church admired her cooking, and the men respected her for being loyal to her husband, Garrett Rayne, who ran a local towing service. Their small white cottage with blue shutters was seen as a symbol of small-town love and stability. But behind those freshly painted walls was a woman carrying a secret that would poison everything she touched. Odessa had tested positive for HIV 2 years before she met Garrett. She'd contracted it from a college boyfriend during a brief time in Memphis. The relationship ended quickly, and she never told another soul. When she returned to Larksville, she quietly picked up her life again, changed her phone number, got a job at a florist, and buried the truth deep. She convinced herself it wasn't who she was anymore. With a strict routine of antiviral medication hidden in multivitamin bottles, Odessa presented herself as clean, innocent, and unbreakable. To the world, she was flawless. But the truth was quietly rotting underneath her surface. When Garrett proposed after 6 months of dating, Odessa said yes without hesitation. Not because she loved him, but because she wanted normal. She wanted routine, praise, and the safety of a small town that wouldn't ask too many questions. She didn't tell Garrett about her diagnosis. She believed as long as she looked healthy and took her pills, she was fine. She had learned to suppress the reality of her condition and live in a fantasy of control. But Odessa wasn't satisfied with normal for long. She craved attention that Garrett couldn't give. He was quiet, busy, and often exhausted from his long hours. When she complained about feeling ignored, he gave her flowers or fixed up her car, but it wasn't what she wanted. Odessa wanted to feel desired, pursued, and admired. That craving turned into something dangerous. She met Braylon Cross at a local gym. He was younger, fit, and flirted like it was second nature. Odessa liked how easily she could charm him. Their relationship started with morning workouts and turned into room visits by the end of the month. Odessa told herself it was harmless fun, a distraction, something that made her feel alive. She didn't think about the risk. She had already convinced herself long ago that the past was irrelevant. It didn't stop with Braylon. A few months later, she met Nolan Vexley at the flower shop. He was passing through town for work, and Odessa caught his attention immediately. She wore a light blue dress that day, and he came back every week for flowers, even though he admitted he was single. Their affair was short, but intense. Odessa never told him about Braylon or Garrett. She kept them all separate, like chapters in a book only she could read. Then came Ezra Jorn. He was different. Older, wiser, and married. Odessa found comfort in his maturity. He listened when she talked, and in him she found someone who made her feel safe. Ezra was a father of 2 and held a job at the county office. He was the only one who ever made her second, guess her lies. But she kept going. She liked the power of it, the attention, the danger. None of them knew about each other, and none of them knew about the virus. Garrett started getting sick first. Weight loss, fatigue, night sweats. Odessa played the concerned wife perfectly. She held his hand at doctor visits and made chicken soup while secretly swallowing her own pills when he wasn't looking. She told herself it was just coincidence. But soon Braylon got sick too. Then Nolan. Then Ezra. One by one, the men began to fall apart, and still Odessa smiled at church, walked her dog down Main Street, and acted like everything was normal. But the walls were starting to close in, and Odessa could feel it. People started asking questions. She could sense the suspicion in Garrett's eyes and the tension in Ezra's voice. The world she'd crafted with delicate lies and perfectly rehearsed smiles was beginning to tremble. Odessa didn't know when it would all collapse, but she could feel the ground softening beneath her, and she knew it wouldn't hold much longer. Braylon Cross never imagined that a casual flirtation at the gym would become the worst mistake of his life. He had no clue that Odessa Rayne, with her shy laughter and soft perfume, was hiding something deadly. To him, she was just a lonely housewife looking for adventure. They met during early morning workouts when the gym was quiet. and it didn't take long for Odessa to invite him into her world. Braylon thought it was a secret affair with no strings, no guilt. He didn't know his health was being stolen with every encounter. Around the same time, Nolan Vexley was traveling through Larksville on a business trip. He visited a handful of local shops while waiting for a client meeting, and stumbled into the flower shop Odessa worked at. She wore a pink apron and handed him a bouquet of tulips with a smile that lingered. Nolan didn't live in town, but he started making excuses to pass through every few weeks just to see her. Odessa welcomed his attention. She played the part of a free-spirited woman stuck in a loveless marriage, hinting at heartbreak, but never giving the full story. Nolan bought it all, and when Odessa invited him to a motel just outside of town, he didn't hesitate. Ezra Rayne, however, was more complicated. He had a family, a respected job, and a reputation he cared about. Still, when Odessa caught him sitting alone at a church fundraiser, she saw something in him. Loneliness masked by pride. She offered him a cookie, and their friendship began with casual phone calls that slowly turned into long drives down empty roads and quiet afternoons spent together in hidden places. Ezra tried to resist, but Odessa was magnetic. She made him feel young and important again. He convinced himself it was harmless, that no one would ever find out. But he underestimated how much destruction Odessa could bring into his life. Each of the three men thought they were the only ones. Odessa kept her web tightly spun. She had different stories for each of them, and she knew exactly what to say to keep them loyal. She moved through their lives like smoke, never leaving enough behind for anyone to see the full picture. But while her lies kept the affairs alive, her silence about her diagnosis made them deadly. When Garrett began falling ill, Odessa's grip on her perfect image started to slip. Garrett assumed it was stress or burnout, but after multiple visits to the doctor and a series of tests, the truth emerged. He was HIV positive. Shocked and heartbroken, he sat in silence while the doctor explained the numbers. Garrett had never cheated on Odessa. He trusted her with his life. When he came home and told her, she cried and blamed him, accusing him of being unfaithful. He felt guilty, confused, and isolated. Odessa's lies were so convincing that Garrett began questioning his own memory. A few weeks later, Braylon started experiencing symptoms too. He thought it was just overtraining until the fatigue and fevers wouldn't go away. He finally went for testing and received the same diagnosis. His world shattered. Nolan was next. When his results came in, he was crushed. He had no idea how this had happened and began retracing his steps, desperate for answers. That desperation led him to search Odessa's name online, and he found a small mention of her husband being recently diagnosed. Then came Ezra, the last to learn the truth. His diagnosis pushed him into panic. He had a wife, children, a reputation. At first he couldn't believe it. He even considered the possibility of lab error, but when he made an anonymous call to a friend at the local clinic, what he learned chilled him. Garrett Rayne was also positive. The connection was clear, and Ezra realized that all their paths led to one person, Odessa. Each man, now broken and betrayed, began to dig deeper into her past. It was Braylon who reached out to Nolan, and soon the two exchanged details. When Ezra joined them, everything fell into place like pieces of a twisted puzzle. All three had been involved with the same woman. All three were infected. And none of them had been warned. The lies had cost them their health, their stability, and for some, even their families. As the realization settled over them like a storm cloud, a single question echoed in their minds. What would they do about it? As spring settled over Larksville, the town's blooming dogwoods and sunny mornings couldn't cover the rot that was beginning to rise beneath its quiet surface. Garrett Rayne, now reeling from both his diagnosis and the unraveling of his marriage, had become a ghost in his own home. The man who once worked long days and fixed engines until midnight now spent hours lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the moments he might have missed the truth. He was losing weight fast, and people began noticing his frail appearance at the gas station and church. Rumors quietly circulated, but no one dared say it aloud. Until a private investigator showed up at his door, Garrett had reached a breaking point. After confronting Odessa and receiving only denial and guilt-shifting, he decided to take action. He hired an out-of-town investigator named Cole Drayton, someone with no ties to Larksville and no bias toward its residents. Garrett handed Cole Odessa's name, her old phone numbers, and even her pill bottles hidden inside a coffee can. He needed the truth. He needed proof of what she had done. Meanwhile, Braylon Cross had fallen into a depression that made it hard to get out of bed. His body ached constantly, and the once vibrant trainer barely recognized himself in the mirror. His gym business suffered. Clients stopped showing up, sensing something was off. Nolan Vexley lost his job after weeks of unexplained absences and erratic behavior. He isolated himself in his apartment, growing angrier with every unanswered question. Ezra Jorn's marriage was collapsing. His wife had tested negative, but the suspicion and betrayal were too heavy to recover from. Ezra had moved into a small rental property on the outskirts of town, where he lived alone, watching his reputation crumble. All three men had spoken to each other now. Their connection was no longer a coincidence. Odessa's name came up again and again. The final confirmation came when Braylon found an online medical article about criminal transmission of HIV, cases where people knowingly infected others and were charged. It sent a chill through him. Odessa knew. She had to have known. They began collecting messages, receipts, timelines. Nolan found an old photo with a date stamp. Ezra remembered she once took her meds in front of him, but said they were for stress. Garrett, too, was starting to piece things together. Cole Drayton worked quietly but thoroughly, obtaining Odessa's old health records through a loophole and confirming that she had been diagnosed with HIV before her relationship with Garrett ever began. The discovery felt like a gut punch. Garrett printed out every page and brought it to his lawyer. He filed for divorce that same week and reported Odessa to the authorities, attaching the medical records and statements. Odessa didn't flinch, at least not in public. She acted confused, shocked, even insulted. She walked through town with her chin up and refused to acknowledge the whispers, but inside she was crumbling. She had lost her job at the flower shop, been asked to leave the church group, and found a threatening note on her car windshield. Her face was no longer welcome in Larksville. She avoided phone calls, ignored the sheriff's office requests for questioning, and stopped leaving the house except late at night. Then, one morning, Odessa was gone. Her car missing, her clothes taken, no note, no warning. Garrett came home to an empty closet and a bedroom that looked like it had been looted. She had vanished without a trace. The next day, Ezra, Braylon, and Nolan received identical letters in their mailboxes. Each envelope contained a single photograph. Odessa standing in front of a cabin with her arms crossed. No return address, no explanation, just a chilling message scribbled on the back of each photo. You don't know what you've started. The sheriff was notified, but no one had seen her. Cole traced the cabin to a property just off Red Hollow Road, an isolated piece of land once owned by Odessa's grandfather. Police visited the location but found it empty. No sign of Odessa. No sign of recent activity. But something about the place felt wrong. The walls were still, the floorboards creaked, and in the center of the kitchen table sat 3 unused bullets laid side by side. The investigation had turned darker than anyone expected. What began as betrayal had now grown into something more dangerous. Odessa wasn't just running, she was planning. The morning air on Red Hollow Road was thick and still, the kind of silence that made even seasoned officers uneasy. It was just after dawn when a call came in from a retired farmer who lived a mile down the gravel stretch. He reported hearing 3 sharp cracks in the night. Gunshots, he thought, but wasn't sure until he spotted a rusted sedan parked half-hidden behind the old Miller cabin. The cabin had been abandoned for years, a decaying shell surrounded by trees and thorns, forgotten by time but now at the center of something unspeakable. When deputies arrived, they moved slowly. The car was registered to Nolan Vexley. The engine was cold. No one answered knocks at the cabin door. Inside, the scene was a nightmare. 3 bodies lay in the living room, each shot execution style. Braylon Cross, Nolan Vexley, and Ezra Jorn, all dead. There were no signs of struggle. The furniture was untouched, the floor unsmeared by panic. Whoever did this had done it cleanly, precisely, and without hesitation. Blood had pooled beneath each victim, but none of it suggested a fight. The victims were positioned deliberately, lined up in chairs, hands limp at their sides, as if they had been made to sit quietly before their end. The sheriff's department sealed the area and called in the state police. Forensics combed the room, but what they didn't find was just as disturbing. No fingerprints, no gun, no footprints leading away from the cabin. only tire tracks in the gravel that matched the sedan. Odessa's name was immediately floated. It didn't take long for her to become the primary suspect. The photograph sent to the victims, the sudden disappearance, the connection to the cabin. It was all too convenient. Garrett watched the news coverage from his living room in stunned silence. He had suspected she was dangerous, but he never imagined it could lead to murder. The town, once quietly murmuring about the HIV scandal, now buzzed with horror. Investigators interviewed Odessa's family, but most of them had cut contact years ago. Her mother hadn't seen her in over a year. A cousin remembered her mentioning the cabin once but didn't know she had access to it. No financial records showed Odessa renting a car, buying a weapon, or making travel plans. It was like she had disappeared into smoke. Yet the murders were real, clean, intentional, and the killer had left no obvious trace. Some speculated it was revenge. Others believed Odessa had snapped under pressure and wanted to silence the people who exposed her secret. But the details didn't fully add up. Why would the men go there together? Who lured them? There were no text messages or emails inviting them to the cabin. And more puzzling, each man had his phone turned off. Not a single call or signal pinged after 10:03 p.m. the night before Garrett began receiving threats from anonymous sources online. People accused him of helping Odessa disappear. Others thought he might have done it himself, out of shame or rage. The pressure became unbearable. He was placed under protective watch, though investigators believed he had no involvement. Still, his connection to the case made him a target of both suspicion and sympathy. A week passed before a break came in the case. Odessa's car was found 2 counties over, parked near the Tennessee River. The keys were in the ignition, and a note was left on the dashboard. It read simply, "This is where I let go." In the passenger seat was a syringe. The medical examiner later confirmed it was filled with fast-acting insulin. A body was not recovered, but footprints led down the embankment to the water's edge, then vanished. Divers searched the river for days but came up with nothing. The current was strong, and the banks were muddy. While many believed Odessa had taken her own life, others weren't convinced. No body meant no closure. The photo she had sent, the precision of the murders, and the eerie silence she left behind painted a different story. The cabin was eventually boarded up and deemed a crime scene indefinitely. Locals avoided Red Hollow Road altogether. Flowers were left on the roadside for the victims, but most people couldn't forget that something far darker had happened in their town. Odessa had not just infected lives, she had destroyed them. And even in her absence, her shadow stretched over Larksville like a ghost that refused to fade. The weeks after the Red Hollow murders dragged by like a slow-burning storm. Larksville was no longer the quiet town it had once been. Fear clung to every doorstep, and silence filled the spaces where gossip used to thrive. People spoke in hushed tones at the diner and looked over their shoulders in church. Everyone had a theory, but no one had answers. Odessa Rayne had vanished, possibly into the Tennessee River, possibly into the wind, and with her, the truth had vanished too. Garrett Rayne lived like a man in limbo. He stayed in the house they once shared, surrounded by empty rooms and haunting memories. Despite the protective custody being lifted, he rarely left home. He was sick, both physically and emotionally. His immune system was compromised, his weight continued to drop, and the news of the triple murder had shattered what little strength he had left. No arrests were made. No one came forward. Odessa's note, if it really was hers, left more confusion than clarity. Even her handwriting wasn't definitively confirmed. The police closed the case as a presumed murder-suicide, placing the responsibility on Odessa, though without a recovered body, the official status remained under investigation. The forensic evidence was minimal: no weapon, no fingerprints, and no forensic trace in the car beyond her DNA on the steering wheel and insulin syringe. The 3 men, Ezra, Nolan, and Braylon, were buried in quiet ceremony. Their families mourned in isolation, refusing press interviews and dodging public appearances. Too much shame, too many questions, and no real comfort. But not everyone was ready to forget. Cole Drayton, the private investigator Garrett had hired months earlier, continued digging. Something about the cabin didn't sit right with him. He studied the crime scene photos obsessively, taking note of how perfectly staged it all looked. The bullets had been placed on the table in a way that seemed theatrical. The men had no defensive wounds. Their chairs were lined up facing the same direction. It was as if they'd been posed. Cole wasn't convinced Odessa had the ability or the time to do it all alone. He focused on Odessa's movements in the days before she disappeared. A gas station camera showed her buying a map and 2 large water bottles. She had been wearing sunglasses and a scarf despite the heat. She was seen again at a pawn shop outside of town where she sold a gold bracelet that matched one Garrett remembered gifting her. But after that, nothing. Her trail went cold. The car near the river was the last confirmed sighting, and no bank accounts had been touched since. Then came the unexpected. A memory card mailed anonymously to the sheriff's department. No note, no return address. Just a small black chip in a plain envelope. On the card were 2 short video clips. The first showed Odessa standing near the cabin's porch talking to someone off camera. Her voice was calm, confident, almost proud. She mentioned making them listen. The second clip was darker. Blurry footage of the 3 victims walking inside the cabin together. Braylon appeared tense. Nolan held a small notebook. Ezra looked resigned. None of them looked forced, and none seemed aware it would be their last steps. The sheriff released a statement, acknowledging the video, but said it didn't conclusively prove Odessa was the killer. If anything, it deepened the mystery. Why did they go there willingly? Who filmed the footage? And why was it sent weeks later? Some locals started to believe a second person had been involved. Someone Odessa trusted, maybe a former lover. Maybe someone who had known all along. Garrett wondered if she had manipulated someone else to carry out her final act of vengeance. Someone who hadn't come forward and never would. The thought kept him awake most nights. Months passed. Odessa's name faded from headlines but not from memory. Her face, once seen smiling in church bulletins, now lingered like a warning. Her crimes had not only taken lives, but poisoned the very air of trust in the town. Her story became a cautionary tale told to daughters and whispered about by old women on porches. No new evidence ever surfaced. No sightings, no arrests. The cabin was torn down, the land sold off, and the town did its best to move on. But some believed Odessa was still alive. Watching from a distance, planning something else, or simply hiding in plain sight, Larksville would never forget. And even in death or exile, Odessa Rayne had ensured she'd be remembered forever, not as the sweet florist, but as the wife who infected 4 men and vanished into murder and mystery.